please join me as we welcome Opal Shields, who just celebrated her 100th birthday on July the 8th. A longtime resident of Central Florida and retired educator, Opal has traveled extensively, and these travels have led her to some interesting places that we're excited to hear about. Her story is definitely one of pushing the envelope. Welcome, Opal.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here today, and I want to hear about that special 100th birthday celebration.
At Taft Senior Center. There were 100 people there, and Teresa Jacobs came, and she gave a long talk. And there were a lot of celebrities there. Someone said there never had been so many celebrities in Taft at one time before.
Well, I understand that Mary Jacobs even had a proclamation declaring that July the 8th was Opal Shields Day.
Right, and Buddy Dyer did the same thing for Orlando.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, you have lived in Taft since 1916. What was it like growing up there?
Taft was very small, maybe 200 people. And it was just all dirt roads and just very country.
And you knew your neighbors?
Oh, yes.
Are there many of the families that you knew growing up, are many of their descendants still in the Taft area?
A few I meet at lunch. I go to lunch at Taft every Tuesday. Granny Nanny takes me, and I meet some of my old friends that were there many years ago.
So you definitely have a link with the community. And I know that you have been an educator in Taft, but before we talk about you teaching there, I want to talk about your World War II years.
Well, to begin with, when I was a senior in high school, I was to go from Taft to Orlando Senior High, but there were no school buses in those days. So my dad taught me to drive when I was 17 years old in 1931. We had a 1926 Dodge four-door. I picked up 3 girls in Pine Castle. They paid me 75 cents a week to take them to school. And that bought all my gas. Gas was 15 cents a gallon. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It is.
But I graduated in 1932, and we didn't have enough money for me to go to college. But I was able to borrow $500 in December. So I started college at Florida State College for Women in Tallahassee in January 1933. The tuition was free for state residents, and the room and board at the college was $150 a semester. I paid the $150, and I put the other $350 in the First National Bank in Orlando. But in February, the bank failed, and I lost my money.
Oh.
But I was able to get a job in the college library. The minimum wage was 25 cents an hour, and I made enough to buy all my books and school supplies. And then I was able to get a dining room scholarship for the next 3 years, and I waited tables in the college dining room and worked in the library, and that paid all my expenses. I graduated in 1936. I was certified to teach physics, math, and English. But back then, there were only 2 or 3 high schools in Central Florida, and none of them needed a physics or math teacher. So I was able to get a job at Wassissa, Florida, which is a town up near Tallahassee. And a week before school started, I took the Greyhound bus out of Orlando to go up there. And I stopped at Apopka. And someone came out from the bus station and said, there's a telephone call for Opal Langley. That was my maiden name. And I went in, and it was the principal at Winter Garden High School. She said, will you come and teach physics at Winter Garden High School? Of course, I said yes. So I taught physics at Winter Garden High School. It was a good job. I taught 5 classes a day, and I got $100 a month, $900 a year.
Oh.
But World War II started, and then in 1942, I joined the Navy. Boot camp was in Hunter College in New York City. And my platoon marched in a parade down Fifth Avenue. I was sent to meteorology school in Lakehurst, New Jersey. After learning meteorology there, my first assignment was a Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, Florida. And my job was to give the pilots a weather report. They had to get weather clearance before they could take off. One day, Charles Lindbergh came in, and I gave him a weather report. He was flying to Pensacola.
Oh.
But after a year in Jacksonville, I was transferred back to Washington, D.C., where I decoded Japanese weather reports. The weather reports were in numbers. We didn't have to learn the language. But I took a class in it, and all I remember is sayonara, goodbye. But I was there until the end of the war. One day, I came home on leave, and I bought a ticket on the train to Taft, and the conductor came through checking the tickets. He was an older man. He probably had children my age. I was always skinny, and I was a young girl in uniform. And he looked at my ticket, and he said, "But the train does not stop at Taft." And I said, "Well, I'll get off in Orlando." But every time he came through checking the tickets, he was so sorry. He'd shake his head and say he was so sorry the train didn't stop. But we left Jacksonville, and he came through all smiles. He said, "The engineer has agreed to stop at Taft." So the train stopped and let me off. We just lived 2 blocks from the tracks. But then I decided, instead of going back on the train, I would go out to the military air base and see if I could get a free ride back on an airplane. So I went out to the military air base. And the officer in charge, sitting at the desk, was Russell Pounds, that I had had in my physics class in Winter Garden 8 years before. And he was glad to see me. And he got me a ride with an admiral within the hour. And the admiral was very kind. He had his aide carry my suitcase. And when we got to Washington, the aide took me in a Jeep to my apartment. 2 other girls and I had an apartment at 17th Street and P Street. Washington was very interesting. There were so many things to do there. We went to the National Theater. I remember seeing Tobacco Road, the play Tobacco Road, and there were many others that we saw. We did a lot. But when the war was over, I went back to Winter Garden to see if she needed a teacher, and she needed a math teacher. So I taught math there for a year. But I had enjoyed working with meteorology, and so I applied to the Weather Bureau for a job, and they gave me a job in Del Rio, Texas. So I went out there. And one of the men that worked in the Weather Bureau office talked me into going out to the airport and taking flying lessons on a GI Bill. So I went out and took flying lessons. I got my private pilot's license, and then I went on and took the course for commercial pilot's license. This was very interesting. I had to do a 700-mile solo flight, I remember, and had to do 10 hours of night flying, which was very tedious, and many other things. And then when I finished the course, a man was coming down from San Antonio to give me my exam. And at the airport, the man told me he did not approve of women pilots. So I didn't expect him to pass me, but I did everything he said to do, and I passed. So I got my commercial license.
Well, I know that that was most unusual for that era.
Yes.
And yet you left that exciting career to come back to Taft. What brought you back to Taft?
Well, At the airport, I met a lady who was a millionaire. In those days, million was the highest number you heard. You never heard the word billion, but she was a millionaire, and she owned a mansion on the edge of town, and she was a widow. And her sister was a widow, and she came to live with her. But Mrs. Brinkley liked to travel, and she didn't want to go away and leave her sister alone in the mansion, so she asked me to come and live with them. So I went and lived in the mansion, got free room and board, and maid service.
Oh.
But at the end of the mansion, there was a huge room where they had a $50,000 pipe organ, and I played the organ. So I was very happy to play it. It had 4 manuals, 4 keyboards.
Oh, I wish we had more time to talk. And I want to thank you, Opal.
But then he wasn't too well, so I thought I would quit the Weather Bureau and come back to Taft. There was a job in elementary school available just a half a block from my home, so I took that job in elementary school.
Very good.
And,
well, I thank you for the contribution you have made to our nation through your service with the Waves and the contributions you've made to the community. And I know you're continuing to do volunteer work. And you have been a most interesting guest. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, in teaching, though, the principal's daughter was going to get married in June, and I was playing the organ for her wedding. And her fiancé was going to the University of Florida at Gainesville, and he was coming down for a wedding rehearsal in May. So he called Emily and he said, I'm bringing my roommate. Will you get him a date? So she asked me if I'd be his date, and I said yes. So Ray brought his roommate, and his roommate was Leroy Shields.
And the rest is history.
So we met in May, and we married the 29th of July.
Oh.
And it was a very happy marriage. We did everything together. We belonged to a singing group together. He had a good bass voice, the Golden Tone singing group, and we belonged to a square dance club.
And I know that you later opened a rock shop. Oh, this is so interesting. But I'm afraid we are going to have to stop. Thank you for being with us, Opal.
Thank you. Oh, good.
My goodness. I want to thank you for joining us for the Central Florida Elders, their life stories. Certainly every life has a story, so keep writing yours. We'll be right back.